everyone, Brenda Earl-Stokes, owner and creator of Piano and Voice with Brenda. And I just wanted to take a moment and wish everybody a happy Martin Luther King Day. Here in the US, we have a holiday on this day to celebrate the life of the wonderful civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday is on January 15th, and we celebrate it on the Monday that falls around that date here in the US. I usually post a Motivation Monday about practice tips or ideas, but today I really am feeling motivated about civil rights and talking about civil rights. Now, this is a very difficult discussion to have, I think, for many of us, and I have been debating back and forth with myself whether I should have this conversation or not, but I really feel very strongly about this. As many of you know, everybody knows what happened at the Capitol building about a week and a half ago, where people stormed the Capitol building to try to overturn the results of the election. It was violent. A bunch of people died. It's been very heartbreaking as a U.S. citizen to have to go through all of this. But what has been in some ways even more aching or heartbreaking has been watching commentary from people about what this means and relating it to the civil rights movement that's going on here at the moment in the US. I have seen commentary from people saying that, well, the Black Lives Matter movement is just as bad, or the Democrats were saying that it was okay that there was violence during the Black Lives Matter, that this is just as bad. And I just want to stop everybody who has been saying that to just have this little chat with you about the issues with that. So the first thing is, when it comes to civil rights, you can't really be neutral. You can't say both sides are bad. You can't really say, well, there was violence at the protests for Black Lives Matter. Obviously, there was some violence that was going on this summer. It's a complicated matter, and I will assure anybody out there that the Black Lives Matter movement is, completely a peaceful movement, and other things that were going on, unfortunately, really don't have anything to do with the movement itself. And then I will say also, when George Floyd was murdered, with Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, were the whataboutism. Well, George Floyd should have just did what the police officer said, or Breonna Taylor shouldn't have had a boyfriend who was involved in illegal activities, or Eric Garner shouldn't have been struggling. I've seen a lot of that being posted, and I've seen people say that and post that who are jazz musicians, who are R&B musicians, who are rock musicians. And I really think that this is a time where many of us can just take a second away from commentary and start to maybe take in some different information. All right. First and foremost, it's pretty obvious I'm a white person, and I'm a white person that has made their career playing jazz, which is a Black American music. My heroes were all Black musicians, African American musicians. Oscar Peterson, Afro-Canadian musician, as he liked to refer to himself. And so I owe a huge debt of gratitude to African American people and to African American culture. Without those people and that culture, I would have had no career. This would not exist for me. And I get emotional saying that because I have been a beneficiary of this music without having to experience the struggle that people went through. And I take that very, very seriously. I take that personally, which is why I get very frustrated when I see fellow musicians, fellow jazz and contemporary musicians who start with the whataboutisms with all of these things, as though they're comparing apples to apples, which is not the case. All right. So I grew up in a primarily white city in Ontario in Canada, and really my only experience to Black culture was through the music. And when I moved to New York in the early 2000s, I moved into a primarily Black and Hispanic neighborhood in New York City, in Harlem is where I lived. And during that time, it was sort of the height of stop and frisk. And the stop and frisk movement was from the New York Police Department, where they had permission to stop anybody they wanted to for any reason and search them. And living where I did, I was seeing that happening all the time, like multiple times a day. I would be walking from my apartment to the subway station and be seeing guys that I knew from the gym, you know, Black and Hispanic guys that I went to the local gym on the corner, guys that I knew, being stopped and frisked by police all the time. And it was supposed to be making the world a safer place, or the city a safer place, or cleaning the violence up, or cleaning up the drugs or the guns. But the experience of it always made me feel really unsettled. And now that I'm a mother, I think I can identify better those feelings of why that felt so wrong to me, in that all these guys were just constantly being stopped and frisked, and here I was walking around, and that never happened to me once. And at the time, I don't think I was thinking that way, but now that I've started to learn more about white privilege, you know, you don't really realize that you have privilege, right? It's like taking for granted good health, or having enough money, or having enough food. You don't really consider somebody else's experience. If you're in good health, then you don't really think about having poor health. And it's really that same experience. And so, having lived during that time in Harlem and seeing that firsthand, it started to open my eyes to some of what has been going on in this country. With the Black Lives Matter protests this summer, after the murder of George Floyd, and seeing all of that bubble up, and seeing people saying things like, I'm not racist, I disagree with this, but I'm not racist, really made me realize that I needed to dig a little deeper to figure out, to have a better sense of what this meant, and what it meant for me, and what it meant for the people around me. And so I did some research, I did some of the reading, and I'm going to recommend a couple of books that I think, for anybody who's still in the questioning phase, questioning Black Lives Matter, I've seen people questioning whether America is even a racist country, or does racism exist. And so I want to suggest a couple of books that I really hope that you check out if you're still in the sort of questioning phase about all of this. This first book is called How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. What I love about this book is that he talks about the history, the legacy of racial justice, but he talks about it in the first person. And by talking about being anti-racist, it's addressing this idea of neutrality, that it's not enough to say, I'm not a racist, I don't treat people differently, that by standing by and permitting racism to keep going on, or denouncing that you have any privilege, is actually not helping anything. And so it's not enough to be not racist. You really have to be anti-racist. And he tells these stories in the first person. He talks about his own experience. This is an African-American, a Black man, who had to confront his own culture of being racist towards Black people. And it is a really, really profound work. I worked on this all summer, reading through it, rereading passages to really confront some of those things that I didn't realize I felt inside of myself. And so I really strongly suggest that if anyone is still questioning this, or just wants to understand this better, that this is really a tremendous resource. Kendi has also written children's books that address these topics, which are like just incredible. So the other book that I want to recommend is one that I've just finished, and it's called Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And Coates is, again, a writer, a journalist, but this whole book is written as a letter to his son. And it addresses, once again, in the first person, the experience of racism and what racism means to him. And as the mother of a boy, this is, again, particularly heartbreaking and thought-provoking to be thinking that his experience of parenting a son is a very different experience to me parenting my white son. And the fear of the police, the fear of people threatening you, just the fear of living in a racist society. and he really tells a phenomenal story of his life and his experience. And I would say again, for anyone who really wants to learn more about this and discover more about what this experience is about, I really, really strongly recommend that everybody read this. And so, you know, again, this is a hard conversation to have. I live in a place of tremendous privilege. Here I am now living in, you know, the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And one thing I'll say is that I've lived now in this neighborhood for almost 11 years, and I have never seen a stop and frisk happen. I mean, they've banned it at this point, but in the entire time I've lived here, I have never seen a single stop and frisk, compared to when I lived in Harlem, where I was seeing it multiple times a day. So for anyone who's out there who's still questioning, who wants to understand more about what's going on, I really strongly recommend that you have a look at these two books in particular, to understand that. And I feel as musicians who are playing jazz, who are playing pop and rock music, who are singing R&B music, who are involved in musical theater, which also has a huge lineage with you know, African American people and Black American culture. It's so steeped in that I feel like we really owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to our musical ancestors to really understand more about this. So I hope this has been helpful. I would love if we could have a discussion about this, or if people have questions or comments. I will be the first to admit that I don't know everything, that my thinking is still flawed, I'm still evolving, I'm still learning. But I love this music so much, and I love the people that have made it so much, that I feel like it was really my duty as a steward of this music to really understand. So anyways, thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you next week at Motivation Monday.